Hello, it's Jack Tutor here of Attention Magazine. Welcome to Crucial Listening, the podcast where I speak with musicians and sound artists about 3 albums that are important to them. My guest this time is Rich Balling, who is a member of the band Pyramids. Rich does a load of stuff besides as well. He's also in The Sound of Animals Fighting. He's an ex-member of RX Bandits. Ton of stuff. But for this conversation, we start by talking about the new Pyramids album, Pythagoras, their first record since 2015's A Northern Meadow. This new one's coming out on the Flenser, and at its base, it has this collision between shoegaze-inflected black metal, which I guess is the stylistic through line of Pyramids as a whole, but this time with the beats of reggaeton. And all 7 tracks basically dig down into this combination with that beat fusing with the blast beats of black metal. You've got screams buried beneath these lush pop hooks. And the whole record has this sense of facing inwards, and you have references that spill across tracks. And the sense that, the record's kind of facing inward on itself, time folding over itself. It's a really delightful, but also hypnotic experience. I think by track 7, something has definitely shifted in terms of how you're relating to this initially quite garish combination of these 2 disparate styles. I get the impression that Rich just takes a lot of energy from agitating the boundaries between genre, these boxes that we put around kind of culturally informed groups of sounds, and finding places where these genres haven't yet intersected. And it was great to talk to Rich about music other than Pyramids as well. It's clear that Rich, again, this is another one where the guest really likes talking about music. Turns out that I do too. This conversation flowed beautifully. If you're enjoying the podcast, you can support it over at ko-fi.com/crucial listening. You can donate monthly or one-off. It all keeps the podcast ticking. You can also shoot me a message and let me know what you're thinking of the show. I always love reading those. Okay. This is Rich Balling on Crucial Listening. Hello, Rich. Welcome to Crucial Listening.
I appreciate it, Jack. Excited about this. Really excited about any podcast that is tied to talking about top lists of anything, because that's like, okay. As a music nerd, that's my favorite thing, is to like talk about albums from, for a desert island or whatnot. So
glad to provide an outlet for that. So you're here to talk about 3 important albums. Before we get to those, I want to talk about the new Pyramids album, Pythagoras. Sure. So you've mentioned, and I've heard you talk about this in other places as well, this ground zero moment of finding yourself being drawn towards the innovations occurring within female pop, and specifically neo-perio and reggaeton as well. So yes. Take me back. How did that happen? What drew you into that?
Yeah, I mean, some of this, we were chatting before we started recording, and I divulged that I am a father. I don't know if I mentioned that both of my kids are daughters. And so, one thing I realize is that when you're immersed in something, you start to develop, I don't know, a liking to it if you're around it enough, right? So I've had 16 years now of being in a car, playing Taylor Swift, playing Charlie XCX, Ariana Grande, Selena Gomez, all of these female artists. But what I have noticed throughout that journey, for lack of a better word, is just the level of ambition and sonic, risk taking that's been going on in a lot of those artists, especially like someone like Charlie XCX, who's really manipulating sound in a different way, and it's just so appealing and feels so fresh and raw, and it kind of reminds me of those first experiences you have with any genre. And so I don't know, I guess I go through periods in my life where I'll listen to incredibly dark and noisy music for a long period of time. And then it's almost like I emerge needing some sort of cleansing. So then I'll travel into more melodic and catchy music for a while, just because it feels refreshing and a little bit more hopeful than hopeless and this, that, and the other. But really, I notice just that the cyclical nature of music and how it gravitates towards the extreme. Of course, you have, a band like Black Sabbath, right? And then that, now looking back, sounds primitive, for lack of a better word, but obviously we all know how, devastatingly innovative they were. But if you travel throughout the years and find a lineage from something like Black Sabbath to the Norwegian bands, or even all controversy aside, a band like an artist like Burzum with Philosopheme, where it's such a dense fabric of noise that it actually becomes beautiful. Yeah. And so I think that's where that happy place is, where sort of shoegaze has found a place alongside black metal, because they're equally as sort of brutal but also devastating in their volume and their texture and stuff like that. So anyway, noticing that things get so extreme to the point where it tips over and now we're into the beautiful and blissful, I realized that a lot of these hybrids that have been explored recently, what hasn't been explored is more of a pop sensibility, but without sounding cheesy, specifically like reggaeton, because reggaeton is such a global presence in music. But in North America, at least, you don't hear that being brought in at all as an influence to any sort of metal music. And so it just occurred to me that signature beat that you see in all those global rhythms subdivides the blast beat perfectly. And it just occurred to me that much like that crossroads where shoegaze and metal found a relationship, there's actually a similar crossroads with reggaeton and metal. And all of that just sort of comes from my exploration of pop, unpacking different artists, seeing who they collaborate with, and then crossing over into a lot of Spanish female artists. So I guess you could say it started with raising two daughters, listening to Taylor Swift, graduating to Charlie XCX, looking at who she is busy collaborating with, and then moving from those collaborators into this world of reggaeton, which has opened up a huge, obsession for me. I really like a lot of these artists. And again, I don't know what it is, but they tend to be female that I gravitate towards. So I like the sonic palette of the female artist. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love as well how you describe how this is ripe for bringing into something like Pyramids and the black metal and the shoegaze thing. But when you started to put that into practice, like how easy was it to get this rolling, this premise that you had?
It was easier than I thought it might be. First of all, the guys I've been working with, like we've been collaborating on Pyramid since around 2007. And of course, the first record came out on Hydra Head in 2008. And so the same guys involved with that are working together on this. And so there is an element of trust there. So on paper, where this idea of, hey, let's try to hybrid these two disparate genres, where on paper some might say, oh, that looks crazy or that's going to be difficult. These guys were like, well, we've done crazy stuff, so let's just go for it. So it was easy in the sense that there was trust there. And then because we don't write together, it's kind of like a file sharing situation, which I know is familiar with a lot of artists now. But so we started with the beat and we layered guitars over that, and then we layered vocals over that to simplify it. So in other words, if you start with that signature reggaeton beat, then you've got time to breathe and figure out how the guitars can wash over that, so by doing it backwards, the process was easier, I think, too.
One thing I noticed, so I listened to A Northern Meadow again today, and I think one of the most satisfying transitions between that record and this one is just how simple the melodies are on this new record, like a really viscerally satisfying set of chord progressions. I mean, what was that like, melody writing? Because it's almost like there is something so labyrinthine about A Northern Meadow. This is like the direct opposite. So what was it like approaching the melodies for this?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people who are familiar with our older work might think on the surface that Pythagoras is going to be like the odd man out in terms of the catalog. But really, I would sort of say that's more the case with A Northern Meadow. And the reason is because with A Northern Meadow, we enlisted a couple collaborators who had a large impact on the sound that we had not previously done. So like the previous collaborations and the first record, the self-titled, were just like the four of us, and it was very sort of abstract. Everything feels like it could fall apart at any moment.
Yeah.
But with A Northern Meadow, we brought in Colin Marston, who is like, a guitar god from Krallis and a bunch of his other projects. And, he brings an element of precision. And we also brought in Vince Val from Bluthaus Nord, who constructed the beats. And he was also very precise with the percussion. And so there is this element of less of that free-flowing stuff that was happening early on, and also happens on Pythagoras that really was more structured on A Northern Meadow. And so all of that is to say, with Pythagoras, that sort of free-flowing sort of space that was created allowed for the vocals to chill out a little bit and find space and breathe, and it allowed things to open up more to introduce that female Spanish vocal element. And so I don't know, I think a lot of people, this is going to be a love-hate record. You're either going to really like it, you'll really like it, or you'll hear it and you're going to hate it for one of two reasons. One, you might hate it because of just the sound, the genre bending. You're not a fan, right? But then the other thing that people might not get is they'll think that, oh, this sounds like a different band. But again, if you patiently go back and sort of look at the trajectory of the band, it really is the same band within the same world. We're just playing with maybe different rhythms and things, and obviously that causes great impact to the listening experience. But it's not a different band. It is a different sound, but it's all in the same like universe, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what I loved is I heard Fool's Gold, which is the first single you released from it, and then I got sent the whole thing, and I was like, I really connected with Fool's Gold a lot. So I was like, I really hope this record is just basically on the rails of, you know, what I've heard with Fool's Gold. I was so relieved that premise is basically extrapolated throughout the whole record. So for me, it was one of those things where it's like, I love one track, so I was going to love the whole thing. But what I found with the record is that it's so singular as well. Like, you have lyrics that bleed across the tracks, certain phrases that come up, you know, at the, you know, on track 6, they're also on track 1. There feels like there are these lines going throughout the record between different pieces. I even found myself like pairing certain tracks, so Fool's Gold and Cracks felt connected to me, and God of Light and Brian as well. I don't know if it's to do with the tonality or what, but I wondered how you thought about the record structurally, because it feels so singular. The whole thing feels like it's refined to a point. It's beautiful.
Well, I seriously enjoy hearing you say that, just because it's a great observation. I think that it shows you've listened to this thoughtfully, and I appreciate that. But yeah, I without sounding too self-important, I agree about the singular nature of it. I do think that it's pushing boundaries, and I like how you found pairings across the tracks. I do like, there was never a time where things were we sat down and said, let's do a concept album. There was never a time where we were like necessarily trying to link the tracks, but I think something that comes with maturity. And I mean, you know, I'm practically 50 years old now, and like the other guys in the band, we all have kids now, and so I feel like, you know, you sort of settle into your own skin. You really figure out that, you know, you're at a place where you're drawing on your experiences, you're building melodies and stuff like that. That's coming from a place, right? And so I think that once you've matured and reached a certain age, and you've done this for long enough, you start to maybe subconsciously weave things together, so that there's there's a through line that forms, but it's actually not super intentional. It just is happening more organically because you're operating in a fully formed state.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I have one more little question as well, because the artwork is fabulous. So that was by Miami nail artist Crow Vargas.
Yes.
Crocaine. So how did that come to be the artwork for the record?
Yeah, so like there's basically in that whole journey or that pop era that I was describing, when I was being baptized by fire with pop music in my daily life, I started to follow a lot of those artists on social media and see, you know, what else they were getting involved in. And I noticed that a lot of these artists that I was into went to this nail artist to get their nails done.
Wow.
Yeah, so like Laguni Changa and Rosalia and all these artists that were just like all about this artist. And so I started following nail artists, and I grew to really have an affinity for this particular, the art of Crocaine. And so I reached out to her and just said, hey, I have this idea. I think it would be perfect because this, you know, the nails sort of iconically introduce like into the aesthetic piece of the band, like what we're doing musically. And that is, okay, there's a couple things we've never had before in the music. Number one was a female voice, and number two was, you know, those global rhythms and the reggaeton influence. And so nail art is such a part of that culture. It felt right to like sort of represent the introduction of like the female voice and these rhythms with something iconic like the nails. And so I asked her to send me some stuff. She sent me quite a few nail sets that she had done. And the cover art stuck out to me because of the shadow under the hand. It felt very like ominous. Yes. And so I'm thinking, okay, like this just, again, organically speaking, seems to take that aesthetic that's symbolic of the change in sound, as well as the ominous nature of metal and darker music, and it just felt right. So then I sent all those images over to Kevin from Sutek Hexen, and he did the layout with all of it. So
lovely. You've mentioned the female vocals a couple of times. I feel like I also need to crowbar you mentioned there. So it's Emmy Smith. How did you come to work with Emmy, and tell me what that was like as well?
Yeah, so I scoured the earth looking for a collaborator, and I found quite a few that were willing, that were interested. People had sent me, I guess you could say, demos of themselves taking a shot at some of the songs. And I didn't know Emmy, but I found her like on the internet through, looking up like studio musicians, session musicians, people that, do this for a living. And she's down in Argentina, and we just clicked and had a lot of back and forth working on the songs. What's really interesting is that she didn't hear any of the vocals on any of the other vocals or anything really. She had like a demo version of the songs with like primitive guitar tracks and drums, and the songs were about half as long. And I said, hey, I hear your voice here, here, and here, basically for all the songs. So like, and we went back and forth about what that should sound like. She'd never done anything with almost a rap cadence to it before.
Wow, really?
And so she took a stab at it. I gave her feedback. We went back and forth, and then likewise, none of the other guys except for me had heard what she was doing. So then when it all came together at the end, I mean, when I say organic, it's legit. It's like it's something in the universe, I guess, to say without sounding weird. Is just because it all sort of works cohesively, even though it was put together in a very piecemeal way.
Perfect. Rich, as you can tell, I'm big into the record, so I will put a link in the show notes so that other people can be big into the record as well. It's so good.
Awesome. I appreciate it.
Let's go to your important records now. So
sure.
At this point, I like to ask about how you thought about the word important when picking your list. So was there a way that you understood important when picking the list of records that you did?
I love that you asked this because it adds a whole nother layer to just the conversation. But I would just keep it simple with two words, and that is, to me, I interpret important as a record that either has influence or demonstrates innovation or both. And nearly any record that I personally deem important is defined by one or both of those terms. But there is a third term, and this is a looser term that's kind of floating in the ether around those others, and that would be just the element of being unsung or underrated. I don't set out to make that a criteria for what I would consider important, but what I do, I sort of notice a trend. I guess I tend to see a pattern in my own taste that often what I consider important, no matter how influential or innovative, which are my two criteria, are also somehow underrated in some way. Not always, but a lot of the time. So,
do you have any thoughts on why that is?
I don't know. Maybe they're not underrated and I just perceive that they are, or maybe I've just lived my life as an underdog and I want to celebrate what I think might be great and sort of even agreed upon by many as an important record, but maybe should have been more important, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think about that a lot because I wonder as well whether the fact that it's just maybe important to you, I mean, maybe important to other people too, but there's not
Right.
perhaps this cultural acceptance that it's an important record means that maybe you get ambushed by it a bit more than you would if there was a sense you were already listening to something with some kind of cultural gravitas or something. I don't know.
Absolutely. That's well said. I like how you said that, for sure.
Okay, Rich, which one do you want to go
Yeah.
for first?
Well, we could start with Life Lovers Pulver. And, that dropped originally in 2006, but I did not hear it until around the time it was reissued in 2009. So I'm down to start with that one.
Cool. Maybe give me a little introduction as to why this one's important to you.
Yeah, well, let's see. I grew up listening to various iterations of metal. Truthfully, as a youth in the 80s, I'm not ashamed to admit, I had a fascination with hair metal. So I loved bands like Skid Row and White Lion and even Striper. They were like superheroes to me with their look. Like it was like, they were like larger than life. And the origin of this, believe it or not, was watching Pee-wee's Big Adventure as a kid, the movie, and seeing the scene where Twisted Sister's filming a music video on a studio lot and Pee-wee Herman is like running frantically through the set. And just like the genres themselves gradually moving more extreme, like I was mentioning before, I found myself looking for, the more extreme iteration of this. So this is when I've stumbled into Megadeth and Anthrax and Slayer and Metallica, all the big, iconic bands. But being part of that MTV generation meant that I would see videos like Anthrax's Antisocial, and I would expand my taste like that. So in any case, as I grow, so does my taste, and that began to include bands like Godflesh, Atari Teenage Riot, Refused. But the game changer into this world, which led me to Life Lover, was Xasthur. So I heard Xasthur, and that dude like rocked my world. Like the biggest thing for me there was just like how something so lo-fi could be so perfectly assembled.
Yeah.
Of course, like I had grown up listening to bands like Minor Threat, like raw punk rock recordings, and of course we know like bands like White Stripes record in their bedroom and sell like platinum copies or whatever, but like there's something about Xasthur that's like recorded like a demo but couldn't be more perfect.
Yes.
And so that just sent me deep diving. It's right there that I started digging in and found bands like Life Lover. And so to this day, they're my favorite metal band of all time. Like Xasthur, that lo-fi approach is there. But stylistically, the vocals are wild. They're unique and unhinged. Even the samples being used are different. The guitar sound is different. And I love the band. So, coincidentally, the new project that is coming out of that camp, they're calling it Ritual Mord. They just dropped a new album on Bandcamp, and the name of the album is This Is Not Life Lover. But yeah, I really like this band. I love the record. I really could have chose any of the records, but I chose this first one just because that rawness. They stay raw pretty much their whole catalog, but this, it's just, again, it's crazy to hear when people are just like operating at such a primitive sonic level, but it sounds so perfect. I love that.
Yeah, nice. I had a great time with this one. Like a few tracks, I've only listened to it a couple of times through now, but a couple of tracks stood out to me as being favorites. Like, one called Sunday that's just got that riff basically that's dominating the entire thing. That lovely fade up at the beginning. It's so good. Do you have favorites on this record?
Yeah, they're kind of all. I love the whole thing as a whole, but there's a track called MS Salmonella. I guess you would I guess that's how you would pronounce it. I mean, I'm assuming it has something to do with the bacteria. I don't know, but I love how it includes piano against that traditional tremolo guitar, and of course, like the vocals are just frantic. It's like there's a desperation, and I know Life Lover has become sort of quintessential listening for people that are into depressive black metal, or that like almost suicidal brand of black metal.
Yeah.
And I think that desperation in the vocals has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, the first time I put this on and turned it up, I was trying to peel the vocals away from the guitar and kind of identify whether that was even a voice, because it's so, especially at volume, it gets more buried the more you turn it up, I found.
For sure.
So you mentioned these records are, say, like influential or innovative. I guess you've kind of laid out what's innovative in this case. I wondered though how you'd categorize that with relation to your kind of the way you were conceiving important for these records.
Yeah, I do feel like there's a level of innovation, not like, maybe not technical innovation, but just a new sound in a world. When I say world, I mean the world of metal, that can be very hard to navigate. Like, traditional metal audiences are not always the easiest to win over, especially when a sound changes. And there are moments on Pulver that I don't know. I don't know if they're necessarily just something that the average metal audience would just be quick to embrace. So I do think that there was some envelope pushing that happened. I do think that there are bands that you hear these kind of vocals starting to be emulated, and I think that we're still early in their influence. One of the members died, and so the band ended. But I think we're going to see sort of a long journey ahead of bands that are digging up Life Lover music and connecting with it and pulling inspiration from it. So I think that this falls in that innovation, which then will lead to influence.
Yeah. I mean, what are the so this is the first time I've really listened to them. How does their trajectory look like from here? So they had, as I understand, they had like a demo that came out prior to this one, which was basically like extended improvised guitar tracks. But
for sure.
Where did their trajectory go like after this record came out?
Well, it pretty much the sound stays intact, but truthfully the recordings become more polished, but not in a bad way. So it doesn't seem like they, for lack of a better word, they didn't sell out or anything like that. They just probably took greater care in the studio, and for the first album probably had $0 to do anything,
Yeah.
So there's 2008's Conquerors is really good, and 2009's Decadence is really good, but they just get better. Each one gets better, and I just sort of went to this one because you hear all the elements of the sound that then becomes so key in the later recordings, but it's just that raw charm of like doing it the first time and not having a big budget to do it with, and figuring out how to do it well on nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so you mentioned that straight from the top, this this raw sound. So clearly this is part of this record that kind of lunged out at you. And what I find with discovering music that just sounds incredible despite being made with minimal means is that if I'm making music, it makes me realize like I don't really need to get too much of a hang of this. It's okay not to be so like it's okay not to be a fabulous producer. Like there is
100%.
So and you by the sounds of it, have some real production chops, because on the other end of the spectrum, I was listening to the Hospital Gown record today, but
that's another one that caused, I got hate mail over that one, because that record is on the extreme end of me toying with pop, but there was a lot going on in my personal life with that I use that as a method to explore those things and also collaborate with more people. I mean, I love collaborating, and so I was able to collaborate with like the rapper Kreayshawn on that album, and I don't know, I have a lot of fun with collaborating. But yeah, oh my gosh, the Hospital Gown. That's cool that you found that record though.
Oh, it's so good. I had the best time. This is the first sunny weekend in so long, and
fun.
Yeah, so blasting that was a real hit today. But
where are you? Like, what region are you in?
So I'm in Bournemouth in UK.
Oh, okay.
Which is the same place as Michael at Foul Prey, actually, who I know.
Oh, dude, I love that guy. Yes.
Yeah, he's a good buddy. So we meet for coffee quite frequently. But also Dean from Outsider Art is based.
Oh man, I love.
Well,
those
he was
two.
based here.
Seriously, like, no joke. Those two dudes are like, I've never met either in person, but they're two of the most solid, legit, like real human beings.
Yeah.
That, like, you know, they're just like as solid as they come. So
yeah, I owe them a lot in terms of the music that they put me onto, and just as you say, just being just lovely folks within gruesome sounds.
For sure. And the Flesh Liquor Blind River Killer is like my number one noise record of all time.
Wow, really?
Yes.
Mike, that's fucking amazing.
Yeah. Maybe only second to anything done by Puce Mary, because she's like my favorite musician of all time.
Yeah, fair. Wow. I can't even remember why they... Oh, yes, because I was saying I was going to the tip. How was I going to bring this back to a question? I think
you were in the sun, enjoying the weekend, listening to Hospital Gown. I asked you where you were located. And
that's it. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's it. So it's about lo-fi. So hearing Life Lover and it being so kind of lo-fi in a liberating way... does that, I mean, do you find that enabling to hear a record like this? Does it enable you from a production standpoint? Yeah, it does.
100%. I don't know if I consciously... Here's what's weird. It's like it's in such a lo-fi place that I wouldn't even be able to replicate it, right? Like if I went in and I actually made it a goal to sound lo-fi and do it as well as they do, like it would end up sounding like trash because I wouldn't be able to pull it off. But that's what's weird about it. It's like these masterpieces made on like Tascam 4 tracks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like it's crazy.
Yeah. Important records number 2. Which one do you want to go for now?
We could do Elliott Smith's XO from 1998.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much time you spent with him over the years, but you know, because of you prompting me to sort of think through records I could talk about, this is one I haven't listened to in a long time, but it just felt right, and it felt like it brought a balance to some of the more aggressive stuff we were going to talk about today. But, you know, this was one of the most impressionable eras in my life when I was crossing over into my 20s. And, you know, at that time, I was heavily involved in the ska scene and touring regularly with my band at the time, which was RX Bandits. and I was the sole employee at Drive Thru Records. So there was like a whole pop punk era of my life. But they lived like the office was like an hour away from my house. And so after a long day working, I'd often stay over at their house, which doubled as the office. And I would sleep on the couch downstairs right next to the record collection. And it was there that I discovered like a lot of these seminal indie and emo and screamo bands of the time. And one of the gems I found myself listening to fall asleep often was Elliott Smith's Either Or album. And I loved how he juxtaposed that, vulnerable singer-songwriter archetype with, more raw, darker, and frankly depressing honesty that just felt different than what I was used to. For instance, like at that point, I had listened to Nick Drake for quite a few years, and even though he's a singer-songwriter clearly battling his own demons, it still didn't feel as hopeless and raw as Elliott's material. So for this, I chose EXO, but could have really chosen anything in his catalog through Figure 8, as they've all impacted me significantly. But EXO sticks out, because I saw him on tour around that time in Los Angeles. It's the only time I saw him, but I'm glad I got to see him. And I remember driving home down an overpass on the freeway and hitting an oil slick at some point, which sent my car like spinning in circles, and I was left facing the opposite direction, like towards oncoming traffic. Yeah, I was like at the bottom of this overpass facing oncoming traffic. Felt like I was going to die. Somehow I, got out of there turned around before all the cars got to me. But that sticks out to me as like, I was coming home from an Elliott Smith show, and, I thought that was a fun story to share. But, his sensibility really resonates with me, despite the fact that I had not put on his records for a number of years prior to picking these albums for you. Side note, I remember seeing him perform on the Academy Awards. He sang the song Miss Misery with, which was that song from Good Will Hunting. And I remember thinking it was pleasantly raw and honest, but that the performance left something lacking. But then when I saw him live that night that I almost died, I was absolutely captivated and blown away. So I just think that like, and also I love how he will drop an F-bomb, like you won't hear artists like Nick Drake or whatever, like you don't hear them maybe like use profanity. And Elliott Smith, it's not like he uses it a lot. It's very strategic. So like when he drops an F-bomb, it's almost jarring, but in the best way. You're like, this guy's real,
Yeah.
Because he's not just pushing poetry out. He's also like, from these streets, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. There's is it the last track where he says feel like shit at one point over these beautiful like overlapping vocal harmonies, and it's such the fact that I remember perfect. It now. Yeah.
It's perfect when he does that. I love that. So yeah, love that. Love him. And dude, not to get graphic, and I don't even know if I'm saying this right, but I mean, he took his own life, and that's devastating. But when I'm thinking about the circumstances, if I'm remembering it right, didn't he like do it like a samurai? Like, I think he like fell on a sword. Like that's hardcore, dude. That's not. That's like that's next level.
Yeah. I don't know too much, but that's what I read as well. Is that there were I think it was stab wounds, but my God.
So rest in peace. But yeah, I think he fell on like a samurai sword, man.
Whoa. Yeah. Blimey. So interesting. You plucked this record out, and then I guess in picking it, did you listen to it again once you?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I was thinking, what really impacted me on like from across multiple albums, like an artist that's really important that maybe isn't so metal and isn't so,
Yeah.
And so it came to mind, and I threw them on, and I was like, oh man, yes, this almost feels like an era of my life. So I had to include it. It was really cool that I got to go through this process for you because I sort of rekindled my connection to Elliott Smith. So
Oh, sick. That's wicked.
yeah.
I mean, what are your memories of that show? And I don't know if they've all been pushed aside for that crazy oil slick incident. But
Yeah.
what about the show itself? It sounded like it made a big impact on you too.
It really did. I'm 99.9% sure it was at the El Rey Theater in Los Angeles. There's a couple rooms that are very similar, but I'm pretty sure it was El Rey. And I remember standing in the back of the room and seeing him from like over all the heads because the place was packed, and it was just incredible. So I can visually remember like where I was standing and what he looked like on stage, but I don't remember much else.
Nice. Do you have a favorite track on the record?
That one's hard. There's quite a few. If I was to just like sort of arbitrarily pick one, I really like the track Bled White. I like it because it's a perfect example of how he created such power with his voice, but simultaneously he lacked like that traditional vocal power. Like, what I mean is most of what he did, as you know, is like hushed and vulnerable in its tone, but like he's pushing more on Bled White, but it still doesn't really change the timbre of his voice or disrupt his vulnerability. So it's really interesting. I just feel like he like blends this youthful artistry, like around that time we were seeing from artists like Bright Eyes, but like he brings it to like the bar with like when I mean bar I mean like alcohol, like with Tom Waits, you know, singing in a bar at a piano. So it's like this like youthful Bright Eyes energy, but like coming out of an old soul like Tom Waits in a bar. Like I don't know, like you know.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like there's it's strange. His voice is really difficult to kind of fit in my head because I think it's particularly when you mentioned about the kind of power of it is a strange power, because I think
it is
tonally. I think if you heard it for 2 seconds, you'd be like that person's done no vocal training. There's a fragility to it.
I agree. Yes.
Yeah,
and I like your word fragility. That really is the appeal. You know, it's like what makes it so honest is that, you know, I can't be sure if he's had vocal training, but I wouldn't want to hear it any differently. So it's, you know,
no. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah,
that anecdote as well of you sleeping next to this record stack and discovering these albums, I mean, that's amazing as well. It's so funny, and it's obviously however people discover their important records, that's just how they discover them. But for so many people, the exact circumstances fall out of their head. So I ask, how did you first hear this? And they're like, I have no idea. But you have just the most incredibly vivid memory for this one. Sorry.
I don't know. I was gonna say, I don't know if it's like that with every album, but certainly like the ones that are like so impactful that we would talk about them here, I feel like I chose ones that I just felt like they were clearly impacted me. So
And were there any other records that you discovered during that period of sleeping next to a massive like indie record collection that still stick with you as well?
Yeah, a couple other bands, Sunny Day Real Estate, and let's see, Hot Water Music, the Appleseed Cast. Nice. It was all very, very indie driven those days. So, yeah,
love it. Rich, is there anything else you wanted to add about Elliott Smith or EXO before we...
No, man. I appreciate the opportunity from you that helped me rekindle my attention to this one. So
well, and you the same. I've had a really good time with this. This one's less of a sunny driving around record than Hospital Gown, but nonetheless, it's been wicked to spend a lot of time with this one. So yeah, grateful.
Awesome. Cool. That
final
brings
important
us to,
record. Yeah.
Yes. And this might be favorite band ever. And so, like, my fascination with this band, I'm not ashamed to stress it to the ends of the earth. But I will say that, like, lately, especially in the hardcore scene, I'm seeing a lot of people start to, like, recognize and cite this band as an influence, but it would be Ink and Dagger. I went for what is, I guess, essentially their first full length, even though they had material out before it. And it's The Fine Art of Original Sin from 1998. And dude, they're just, I don't even know where to start with this band. I love them so much. But you know, in that late 90s, early 2000s period, when I was, you know, consuming as much punk, hardcore, indie, and emo as I possibly could, I got really into labels like Jade Tree and Initial Records. Bands like Falling Forward and Boy Sets Fire were super active, and someone recommended I listen to Ink and Dagger, and they weren't even able to describe this band to me because the band was just like that original at that time. And so, you know, like, as I'm sure you're aware, like, hardcore, especially during that period, had broken into like factions. There was like Krishna hardcore and straight edge hardcore and Christian hardcore and vegan hardcore and all of this. There was like ideology being attached to different brands of hardcore. And I was kind of attracted by it, by like how, like with punk, so many bands actually stood for something. And so the irony with Ink and Dagger, though, is it's probably a reaction to all that. They latched onto vampirism as their ideology, like almost like, I guess, probably poking fun at all the other stuff.
Yeah.
But it went from poking fun to feeling so natural that it just became the aesthetic, and people like respected it. So they would wear face paint and stuff on stage. I think three things stick out about this band to me. Like, one is Sean Patrick McCabe, the front man who died at 27. He's like part of that 27 club. Was a total cult of personality on stage. Number two, the guitarist Don DeVore is completely unhinged. I don't even actually know how he would have wrote those chord progressions, to be honest. They're so wild.
Yeah.
And then the third thing is just they were one of the first bands to seamlessly blend those electronic elements with the hardcore punk style that we'd later see with bands like Refused and stuff, and they would get a lot of credit for that with like The Shape of Punk to Come. But Ink and Dagger kind of did it first, and they were even on the Shape of Punk to Come tour for some of the dates. But over the years, I worked a lot with Don, the guitarist, and he is featured. He did some instrumentation on the Hospital Gown record that you... Yeah, and also last year when I relaunched the Handmade Birds label and was doing some noise cassette releases, his first solo noise tape was something that I pushed out that Mike actually mastered for me at Foul Prey.
Wicked.
So yeah, so I'm just like, man, and I wish like at some point they did a reunion where Jeff from Thursday stood in as vocalist, and they called the band Cutthroat Tactics after one of the Ink and Dagger songs, and they did some performances in LA. And then Don had a pre Ink and Dagger hardcore band called Frail that was pretty influential to some degree, and they just did some reunion shows too. So, and you see a lot of bands starting to drop Ink and Dagger as an influence, and I just think that it's so, I don't know, man, I just think it's a really original sound. We're talking about 1998. It's like punk, it's hardcore, it's vampires, it's lyrically crazy. The guitar work is just unhinged. I never got to see them live because I lived in Southern California during this time, and they were scheduled to come to Orange County, where I lived in Southern California, and I guess the drummer at least what I heard, they had to cancel the show because the drummer like got in a car accident and broke his leg or his foot or something.
Shit.
Yeah, so that didn't go well. So all I've been able to see is stuff online from their performances, but dude, they're just like, they're crazy. It's a crazy band.
Yeah.
What did you think? Were you familiar? And if you weren't, I want to know like what your first impression was when you
Okay, so
listened to that.
so I like to come into the podcast like feeling like there's a point of attaining a sense of like I get the vibe of this record, and that came with Elliott Smith quite quickly, I think, because I'm already familiar with Elliott's work. Life Lover as well. There's something about their sound which maybe as well. I was big into Zaster as well. That was a big one for me, so that sound was very salient. This record, up until today, and I'd listened to it like 3 times, I was like, I still don't have a handle on... I still don't feel ready to talk about this album because there's so much. And then I properly listened today and I was like, well, that's because every musician is on one. And it seems like they're just barely holding it together.
Yes!
Like,
dude, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I almost said that, but I think earlier in our conversation, I already like used an example for talking about something of like just at any moment it might fall apart, but like that's this band, dude. Like everything's going on its own track and it's all crazy and unhinged, and at any moment it could all fall apart, but somehow it's keeping it together. And it does take a few listens to lock in terms of being able to digest it without being distracted by the fact that it might fall apart. Like
100%.
Yeah.
And also it's one of those, I had this experience with like hearing Planes Mistaken for Stars for the first time, where there's almost no focal point. Your brain is splayed and you're like, what do I actually listen to though? Because there are riffs, and but everything feels like a riff. Everything's got the ability to yank you over to it. So you just end up... I almost like stood at a crossroads with this one. It's great. I'm having a really good time with it. And then you get the fucking breakbeat stuff, and you're like, well, I don't know then. Like I have to start all over again.
Yeah, you feel like you're like getting things locked in, and then there's like a curveball, and that's just what happens with the early parts of the journey. But man, like and then the singer, I don't know if Sean died before the final full length was released or shortly after, but I don't know. The material before The Fine Art of Original Sin is collected on a release called Drive This 7-Inch Wooden Stake Through My Philadelphia Heart. And it's great, dude. It is so good. But man, like, I think that we're going to continue to see this band sort of bubble up as a band's band and an influence. And I hope somebody reissues like a box set or something.
Has anything like that happened?
Yeah, I think that there's just the original pressings of the CD and vinyl, but there's never been like a repress. And in my early days of Handmade Birds, I did reach out and try to suggest something like that. But at that time, some band members were like MIA, so they couldn't get everybody to like communicate enough to agree or whatever, but hopefully someday. Yeah.
And you mentioned having worked with Don a lot. How did you end up connecting personally with Don?
Yeah, with him it was just straight up an email, So I think it would have started probably around 2010 when I launched Handmade Birds the first time. I would have wrote him an email about Ink and Dagger to try to do some reissues. And then we just sort of stayed in touch since then. But really, really cool dude.
What's he doing on that Hospital Gown track?
He does a lot of like noise-based work using his guitar. So it's nothing. At first I approached him to try to do something vocally. He's not really much of a vocalist, or he doesn't consider himself that, so he chose to spend like a real late night in the studio making just crazy sound, which then got mixed in and threaded throughout that track. So it's kind of hard to pinpoint who's doing what where, but
that's great though.
Yeah.
Huh. You mentioned Sean, the frontman. So tell me a bit more about him, because I watched a few videos earlier, and it seems to be one of those front people where they're not necessarily having to do much, and the presence is still really massive. It feels really loud. Something about how he's standing.
I agree.
There's a point I watched in the video where he turns to talk to the bassist, and there's just something about his face is like radiating something. What is it with him for you?
I don't know. And that's why, like, earlier, I think the only phrase that comes to mind is like cult of personality. Some people walk into a room and it's like maybe there's nothing special about their like posture or their physique or their face necessarily, but maybe just the whole package just kind of like radiates an energy. And so I think he brought just the right energy to that particular group, and so it just worked. It's like lightning in a bottle, you know. That's how we get some of the great stuff in history. So
Rich, anything else you wanted to add about Ink and Dagger?
No, just that, you know, I think most people, if you haven't heard them before, they're going to have a similar experience to you, where it's like it takes a while to figure it out, and then when you think you figured it out, there's like a curveball thrown in. So it really does take patience, and it's almost like you have to like tell yourself, I'm gonna like this band, and like that way you can listen to it enough to really like absorb it and get in the groove with it, you know?
Rich, on the subject of listening, one question I like to ask at the end of the podcast is about how music features in your life as a listener nowadays. So where do you tend to buy music, firstly?
Well, I tend to still gravitate towards physical products. I probably have a package a day hitting my house because I'm online and I'm either on Discogs or I see an ad for, you know, a new album that I'm like, oh, I have to have that. And, I have to pre-order it or whatever else. But I honestly, like, I'm buying more vinyl these days than I ever have, but I try to only buy vinyl if it's something that, like, it's like, this is an artifact that I would want, like, the aliens to find, right? Otherwise, I'm like,
Voyager
I'm buying
record.
Exactly. Otherwise, I'm typically buying CDs. It's still my favorite medium. I like it because it's like, it's like a rugged medium. It still showcases the art. It's still an artifact. It sounds as like it's intended to sound. And I don't know. I like CDs.
Yeah,
so,
right on.
But I try to buy physical product.
What's the last one you bought?
I bought an album called Hush by Slow Crush. They're like they're from Belgium, and they're a heavy shoegaze band, and they're about to put out their first big record on Pure Noise Records. But dude, if you haven't heard Slow Crush, they're incredible.
Heavy shoegaze is my favorite.
Heavy shoegaze, dude. You've got to listen to this band. Slow, just like go. I don't know if you do Spotify or any of those services, but like just find Slow Crush, and they're amazing, dude.
Oh god,
you'll be all about it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Then where do you tend to listen to music?
Car for sure. That's where I'm spending most of my time, is like driving to and from work, or driving kids to soccer practice, or going to the store. And so it's just the easiest way for me to listen. So what's ironic about that is my car doesn't have a CD player. I did buy one that like plugs into the USB, but it's kind of like annoying to use. So here I am continuing to buy physical product, but then when I'm in my car, which is where I listen to most things, I'm like using Spotify and Bandcamp. So
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah. Okay, final question. You don't have to answer this if you don't want to.
Sure.
But what do your daughters think of Pythagoras? Have they heard it?
So they have heard it. I think the jury's still out. I think that I think they have great respect for me, and I think they love the fact that I've figured out how to work a day job and still do art and all of that. So I think that is all surrounded by positive feelings. But I will mention that my oldest daughter actually edited the third video, which is basically back behind the scenes, like sort of just fun footage of us walking around Long Beach, California. And that hasn't dropped yet because we're still, the Flenzer's still doing the tail end here of the first single, Fool's Gold, but there are 3 total lined up. It's the first 3 tracks on the album. So the third one, the third track, which is Bones and Eggshells, was edited by my daughter. She edited the video footage because she's interested in majoring in film and going to school for film after high school and whatnot. So
that's so wholesome.
Yeah.
That's
try to get everybody involved, and So I still remember going to my mom when I was a kid, like late teens, and I was like, dude, I'm going to take this, first semester of college or whatever off so that I can tour. And I was so afraid to tell them that that's what I was going to do, just because, you don't want to like disrespect or disappoint your elders or whatever. And then I remember coming back that night, and there was a note on my bed that said, "Follow your heart." And I was like, dude,
oh my God.
I would kill to still have that note. To this day, it's not very on brand for the rest of what went on in my, but I'll take it. It was a very cool note and really was awesome. And she doesn't even remember writing it, but anyway.
Wow.
So yeah,
that's incredible. Oh, Rich, what a lovely place to wrap this up. Thank you so much. Like, the 3 records you picked were great. As I've said relentlessly, having a great time with Pythagoras too. Thank you.
Hey, man. Thank you, Jack. I appreciate the opportunity. This is really fun. So
cool. And to everyone listening, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.